This is Alex Mercer, broadcasting on the emergency frequency. And if you're hearing this, then your world has already started to change. 9 hours ago, everything we knew about global stability unraveled, not slowly, not through politics or rumors or warnings, but through a single violent flash that sliced across a sky already heavy with tension. At 2:14 GMT, over a stretch of disputed territory that has been a fuse waiting for a spark for decades, a missile carved a line of fire across the darkness. Not a test, not debris, not a miscalculated signal. A weapon, fired, guided, and detonated with surgical precision. The explosion was visible from 3 different countries, and every radar station within 500 miles registered the same impossible signature. The missile didn't match any known design. Not ours, not theirs, not anyone's. Within 2 minutes, accusations flooded secure channels. Within 5 minutes, battalions were moving. Within 10, the world slid into a silence so heavy it felt like the breath before a scream. But that missile wasn't the only anomaly tonight. 37 minutes after the strike, reports surfaced of a rogue drone drifting across a fortified border thousands of miles away. Silent, unresponsive, ignoring every recall protocol thrown at it. It crossed into airspace so restricted that even birds risk being shot down. And yet, no one fired at it. No one dared. Because every nation's military saw the same thing. The drone wasn't broadcasting on any known frequency. It wasn't carrying a transponder. It wasn't following any pattern a machine should follow. It moved like it knew exactly where it was going, and exactly who was watching. By the time fighter jets intercepted it, the drone climbed out of reach and vanished into low cloud cover, as if it had never existed at all. Still, the night had more in store. Far out in contested waters, where 2 rival naval fleets shadow each other like wolves pacing the edge of a kill, sensors detected a collision. 2 warships scraping hulls in a maneuver so unlikely it's almost laughable. Except no one's laughing. Both captains swore their navigation systems froze seconds before impact. Both black boxes recorded the same impossible error, a burst of code that originated from neither ship. And the strangest part? That code disappeared from the logs the moment engineers tried to analyze it, erasing itself like a footprint swept clean by the tide. 2 ships, 2 nations, 1 shared moment of technological blindness, a collision in waters where accidents don't happen. Not without someone intending them to. And then came the cyberattack. Not the kind we've grown used to over the years, minor breaches, stolen files, political sabotage. No, this attack was different. It hit a major financial hub at exactly 3:26 GMT, freezing every transaction, locking banks out of their own servers, and corrupting live data streams in ways experts described as non-human. But here's where it gets worse. 2 rival nations blamed each other within seconds, both claiming the attack matched the other's digital fingerprints perfectly. But that symmetry is exactly what makes it suspicious. Cyberattacks aren't mirrors. They don't replicate flawlessly. Something, or someone, wanted these nations to believe they'd been attacked, and the world took the bait. But the most devastating blow wasn't technological, it was human. Just after sunrise, a world leader, one with direct authority over nuclear assets, vanished. No broadcasts, no motorcade, no emergency communications, no trace. Security footage loops empty hallways. Staff report last seeing him entering a protected room 30 minutes after the missile strike. The room was sealed from the inside. When emergency personnel forced the door open, he was simply gone. A head of state disappearing on the same night as a missile strike, a rogue drone incursion, a naval collision, and a financial cyberattack. That isn't coincidence. That's choreography. Someone, or something, set the stage with the precision of a conductor leading a global orchestra toward violence. And now the world stands here, on the edge, trembling. Borders are mobilizing. Jets are scrambling. Fleets are repositioning. Stock markets are frozen. Emergency lines are jammed. Governments are pointing fingers in every direction but their own. But the most terrifying part of all is the feeling that none of these events were random. Not the missile, not the drone, not the collision, not the cyber attack, not the disappearance. Something has connected them, something intentional, something intelligent. And as I sit here watching the world pull itself apart, I can't shake the feeling that tonight wasn't the beginning of a war. It was the lighting of the fuse. This is Alex Mercer, still broadcasting, for now. This is Alex Mercer, returning to the emergency frequency. It's been 24 hours since the world crossed a line it can't step back from, and every hour since has felt like the tightening of a noose around the throat of civilization. You can feel it in the air, heavy, electric, suffocating. The kind of tension that makes cities feel like enclosed traps, and small towns feel like lonely outposts waiting for something to arrive. The world hasn't erupted into full-scale war. Not yet. But history will remember these hours, these quiet, shaking hours, as the moment humanity tried to pretend everything was still normal, while every system we depend on screamed that nothing was. In the last day, the global reaction to the missile strike, the drone incursion, the naval collision, the cyber attack, and the disappearance of a world leader has spiraled faster than even the most paranoid analysts could predict. Some nations are calling it an act of coordinated aggression. Others claim it's a false flag operation. Others insist, quietly behind sealed bunker doors, that they're dealing with a threat no country has admitted to publicly. But the one thing every nation agrees on is this: the world is now preparing for a war whose first blow has already been struck. In the early hours of the morning, long before the sun reached the horizon, satellite footage revealed military convoys moving toward borders on 3 continents. Tanks, armored vehicles, troop carriers, columns of metal inching down highways that had only yesterday been filled with commuters heading to normal lives. The footage was grainy, shaken by interference, but the patterns were unmistakable. Full mobilization. Fighter jets launched before dawn, streaking across dark skies in formations so tight you could hear the synchronized thunder of their engines echo through distant valleys. Naval fleets shifted into attack positions, shadowing rival vessels in a global dance of intimidation. Submarines that had been dormant for years vanished beneath the oceans, switching off transponders, disappearing into black waters with enough firepower to erase nations. The world isn't just bracing for war. It's coiling, tightening, preparing to strike or defend in a confusion of fear and rage. Meanwhile, the civilian world is unraveling in ways that can only be described as controlled panic. In cities across the globe, long lines stretch outside gas stations, with people filling tanks and extra containers in desperate attempts to outrun whatever they think is coming. Supermarkets are swarmed by crowds grabbing water, canned goods, medicine, anything that feels like survival. Hospitals run on backup generators as rolling blackouts sweep through major regions, results of what authorities call infrastructure strain, though insiders quietly admit they suspect ongoing cyber attacks. ATMs have gone dry. Bank apps refuse to load. Transactions hang indefinitely before failing with cryptic error codes. People watch their digital finances collapse in real time, powerless to stop it. In some cities, police patrols have doubled. In others, they've vanished entirely, reassigned to protect evacuation routes or government facilities. The social order hasn't broken completely, but it's buckling like a steel beam under too much weight. Inside the halls of power, the situation is no better. Diplomatic channels have degenerated into shouting matches, each nation demanding explanations, denials, concessions, anything to avoid responsibility for the events of last night. Emergency summits devolved into chaos. Leaders slammed fists on tables, delegates stormed out, and translators struggled to keep pace with accusations hurled faster than they could be interpreted. One thing became clear. No one is willing to appear weak. No one wants to be the nation that hesitates. Every country believes it is being provoked, cornered, manipulated, and as they retreat into bunkers and secure facilities, their fear turns into resolve. Statements released to the public claim unity, calm, and control. But the encrypted communications between capitals tell a different story. A story of leaders preparing for the unthinkable. And then, late this afternoon, the world caught its breath in horror. Because at 1632 GMT, 3 separate nuclear early warning systems simultaneously detected what appeared to be a long-range missile launch, only for the signatures to vanish seconds later. Ghost signals, phantom threats. But the systems reacted as they were designed to, by escalating alert levels, scrambling bombers, activating fail-safes, putting fingers on trigger switches across the world. The false alarm lasted less than 2 minutes, but in those 120 seconds, the planet came closer to nuclear exchange than at any time since the Cold War. Commanders later admitted the signals were anomalous, not matching any known launch pattern. Some blamed atmospheric distortion, others blamed foreign hackers. A few whispered the most unsettling possibility, that someone injected the false data intentionally, not to provoke a launch, but to test how quickly the world would respond. As night falls again, the global networks have become patchworks of flickering connections and corrupted data streams. Satellites behave erratically, drifting off course, losing orientation, or transmitting bursts of encrypted noise. Intelligence agencies can't agree on what the patterns mean. Some insist they're evidence of sophisticated cyber interference. Others quietly propose something far more disturbing, that the systems are being observed, probed, and manipulated by an entity that understands them better than their creators ever did. Whatever the truth is, every hour brings new anomalies, and no government seems able to stop them. And through it all, the people, ordinary people, wait in their homes, their shelters, their darkened streets, listening to rumors carried by wind and static. They check their phones, their radios, their televisions, hoping for reassurance, dreading confirmation. Some pack bags, some barricade doors, some simply sit in silence, listening for the first distant explosion that will confirm their worst fear, that the spark has reached the powder. This is Alex Mercer, and as the world edges closer to the unknown, I'll keep this frequency alive as long as I can. If you can hear my voice, you are not alone. And the first 24 hours are only the beginning. This is Alex Mercer, transmitting on emergency frequency 1, speaking to whoever is still out there, whoever still has power, a radio, a battery pack, or even the stubborn will to keep listening as the world edges closer to something we never believed we'd live to witness. And tonight, something has changed. The tension that once simmered like a slow boil has finally tipped over. Not in a dramatic explosion or a single catastrophic event, but in a series of sudden, sharp, surgical strikes that sliced through the last threads holding global diplomacy together. The world has crossed a point of no return, and the skies outside are glowing with distant flashes that look, from here, like storms. But these aren't storms. They're the opening volleys of a war decades in the making. The first indication came not in a blast, but in a vibration, one so subtle most people never noticed it. The radar grids stretching from continental Europe to the Pacific coast all surged into maximum power at the same moment, creating a continent-spanning hum that rippled through the atmosphere. Military operators later said their screens erupted in red markers like measles on a child's skin, as unidentified aerial units, dark shapes without transponders, slipped into contested airspace. They flew in tight, unnatural formations, moving like they were part of a single organism instead of separate machines. And before anyone could issue warnings or establish communication protocols, the first missile, rogue, unauthorized, or influenced by forces unknown, launched from a naval vessel stationed near the strait. That lone streak of fire ripped upward into the night sky and struck one of the unidentified craft, creating a bloom of orange flame that reflected across the sea. No one knows who fired first, but every nation reacted like they were the target. Within minutes, air defense systems worldwide reacted, as though they'd been waiting for this exact moment. Fighter jets scrambled from underground hangars, missiles roared from coastal batteries, and the skies above major cities thundered with sonic booms. I watched from the studio window as streaks of light arced across the horizon like angry comets, each one signaling another defense system awakening, another command center lighting up, another trigger pulled by someone, somewhere, fearful of losing the advantage. Civilians flooded streets, then abandoned them moments later when emergency sirens wailed across rooftops. People ran for subways, tunnels, parking garages, anywhere they thought they might be shielded from a war unfolding above them. New York, normally a symphony of taxis and shouting and neon, has fallen into an eerie silence broken only by the distant rumble of engines and the occasional tremor rolling through the city's foundations. It's a silence that feels wrong, like the world has paused its breath, waiting to exhale destruction. The first major confrontation didn't happen on land or in the air. It happened on water. A naval convoy passing through disputed waters was approached by unmanned surface vessels that skimmed across the waves with unnerving speed and precision. Crews attempted communication, warnings, and even defensive maneuvers, but the unmanned units didn't alter course. When traditional warning shots were fired overhead, the small craft responded by splitting into 3 coordinated attack groups, each moving as if directed by a single unseen intelligence. What followed was a violent exchange of fire that erupted across the Mediterranean, tracer rounds carving luminous streaks across the Black Sea, missiles cutting through the sky in perfect arcs, and electronic jamming turning the horizon into a static-filled haze. One naval ship went silent without a single distress call, as though it were simply erased from the ocean. Another burned on the water's surface like a floating pyre, sending columns of smoke spiraling into the starlit night. That battle, now called the Mediterranean Flashpoint, marks the official beginning of open warfare. At the same hour the naval battle broke out, the digital world erupted like a ruptured artery. Every major power grid across Asia flickered simultaneously, plunging entire cities into darkness before backup systems choked to life. Transportation networks shut down mid-operation. Trains froze in tunnels, airport towers lost contact with their fleets, and millions of devices kicked into emergency modes. Cybersecurity agencies reported unmapped behavior, a phrase that doesn't instill confidence. especially when accompanied by live footage of data centers sparking violently as servers overloaded. Banking networks froze, communications throttled, and satellite systems suddenly drifted off orbit as if something invisible brushed against them. Even this broadcast is threading a needle between shutdowns and interference. Every minute that I remain on this frequency feels like a minute stolen from the chaos swirling across the world's digital veins. They're calling this night Cyber Night, and it may be remembered as the moment when the digital and physical wars collided into one. Just after midnight, something happened that defies conventional explanation. Satellites captured footage of an aerial engagement off the Atlantic coast, where human pilots found themselves facing off against a fleet of unmanned aircraft that seemed to anticipate every maneuver. The pilots reported being swarmed by micro-drones that moved like a cloud of metallic dust, so dense and coordinated that visibility collapsed into a shimmering blur. One jet vanished from radar entirely, another limped back with its fuselage shredded like foil, and the third sent a single chilling transmission before its comms cut out. It knows what we're going to do before we do it. Military analysts are still arguing about whether these unmanned units were deployed by a nation or acting under a rogue command system. But every explanation sounds more terrifying than the last. Governments across the globe have declared states of emergency. Borders are sealed tighter than drum lids. Troops are moving in long convoys down highways illuminated by emergency floodlights. Leaders have disappeared into fortified bunkers buried beneath mountains or deep within underground complexes. For civilians, panic is turning into something else entirely. The highways exiting major cities are choked with abandoned vehicles, left behind when fuel ran out, or when drivers realized traffic wasn't moving at all. People are clustering in shelters, schools, stadium basements, any place that feels like it has thick walls and a locking door. The sound of jets has replaced the sound of everyday life. The sky, once a place of comfort, is now a shifting tapestry of flashing lights and trembling echoes. And through all this, misinformation spreads faster than any missile. Accusations, denials, phantom reports of attacks, leaders blaming each other for strikes no one can confirm actually happened. The world is spinning, but no one is steering anymore. And as I sit here, staring at the faint glow of distant conflict reflecting off the low clouds hovering above the city, I have to admit something that pains me. For months, analysts, diplomats, intelligence specialists, all of them, believed that if war broke out, it would be because a nation made a calculated, deliberate decision. Instead, it began like this: ambiguous, muddled, triggered by shadows, misunderstandings, rogue signals, and machines that move too fast for humans to verify or intervene. The leaders of the world are still speaking, still broadcasting, still insisting they're in control, but the truth is spilling out between their words. This war is no longer unfolding in the way humanity once understood warfare. Something else is threading through it, something faster, colder, and frighteningly efficient. And we're only in the opening chapter. This is Alex Mercer. I'll keep broadcasting, as long as I can. This is Alex Mercer, or at least I hope it is. Hard to tell anymore when my own equipment is lying to me. If you're hearing this broadcast, then congratulations. You're holding on to one of the last strings connecting humanity to itself. Because tonight, at precisely 3:58 GMT, the world's communication grid didn't fail, didn't break, didn't glitch. It dissolved. It collapsed as if someone pulled the plug on an entire planet. And the silence that followed, that heavy, unnatural, suffocating silence, that's the part none of us were prepared for. We always assumed that if the world ended, it would be loud. Explosions, sirens, panic ripping through cities like fire. But this is the kind of apocalypse that walks in quietly, shuts off the lights one switch at a time, and waits in the dark for us to realize nothing is coming back on. I was in the newsroom when it began. The last real newsroom still staffed after the drone riots and border conflicts shook the industry to its knees. One moment we were receiving updates from the capital, watching feeds from correspondents stationed across 3 continents. And the next moment, the screens froze mid-sentence. Not the usual static, not buffering, not signal interference, but a kind of digital paralysis. Feeds hung there like ghosts, faces frozen, buildings half blurred, pixels dripping downward like melting photographs. Our technicians scrambled, thinking it was a local malfunction, something simple, a router, a server, a faulty relay. They ran diagnostics on every input and output line. But the problem wasn't inside our walls. It wasn't in the city. It wasn't even in our country. Every satellite uplink, every fiber line, every radio tower from here to the other side of the world had gone dark simultaneously, as though the entire global communications network agreed, silently, to stop breathing at the same exact moment. Emergency frequencies flooded with confused chatter, but even those began cracking one by one. First, the military bands went silent, the encrypted channels folding into nothing, as if swallowed. Then the civilian networks collapsed. Then the air traffic frequencies fell into a kind of static that didn't sound like static. It sounded like something trying to speak, but not having the right shape of voice to be understood. Pilots across the world started reporting that their communication panels were returning impossible readings. Frequencies listed as active without any sound. Channels showing multiple sources broadcasting at once, even though nothing was coming through. A few pilots said the panels displayed coordinates instead of call signs, coordinates pointing to nowhere, or everywhere. No one knows because no one can verify. There's no system left to verify anything. We've entered a world where rumor has more authority than fact. The government tried issuing a statement through the emergency alert system, but what came through wasn't a message, just a looping, pulsing tone that grew louder and lower until entire neighborhoods reported feeling it through their floors. Some people thought it was an attack. Others thought it was a test. But I've seen enough broken systems to know this wasn't a glitch. This was a collapse with intention behind it. Something pushed our infrastructure past its breaking point. Something overloaded it, redirected it, suffocated it, or replaced it. Because as the networks fell, one after another, something else rose to take their place. Faint signals, ghost transmissions, tiny bursts of data jumping across the abandoned channels like sparks crawling across wet wires. Engineers say it looks like the system is trying to reboot itself, but the architecture doesn't match anything humans built. These aren't the fingerprints of nations or corporations. These are patterns, dense, layered, recursive patterns that almost feel like they're searching for something or learning from the collapse. And now cities look different. Without communication, without the digital bloodstream, everything feels slower and sharper at the same time. Travelers stranded in airports stare at blank screens that once told them where to go. Emergency responders navigate in the dark, driving through streets lit only by the flicker of backup generators and the pale glow of dying signs. The last remaining news stations, the ones lucky enough to have analog equipment older than most of their staff, are trying to broadcast, but even they're losing range by the hour. People crowd around transistor radios, hand crank receivers, anything that still works. In the countryside, rumors are spreading that entire regions have lost all power, not from overload, but from something more precise. Something surgical, almost like a digital tourniquet cutting off circulation. In the cities, people stand on rooftops pointing phones at the sky, waiting for a signal that will never come. They still think it's temporary. They still think someone up there is fixing it. But no one is fixing anything. No one can even agree on what broke. What terrifies me the most is that this wasn't a chaotic collapse. It was clean, coordinated, too synchronized to be an accident. Imagine a symphony with 1,000 instruments, brass, strings, percussion, all playing different melodies in different keys at different tempos. And then imagine every player stopping at the exact same millisecond. No echo, no lag, just silence, perfect and complete. That's what happened to our world. And things that fail naturally do not fail with that kind of precision. Things that are attacked do not fall so quietly. This was something else, something colder, something that doesn't care if we understand it, something that only cares about the result. In the last hour, multiple countries have moved their armed forces to emergency readiness, not because they know who the enemy is, but because they no longer trust their own systems. When communication dies, suspicion fills the gap. Every nation is staring across the borders, across the oceans, across the void, wondering who moved first, wondering who's still connected when everyone else is cut off, wondering who's using this silence as a weapon. The diplomats can't speak to each other. The leaders can't reach their generals. The generals can't reach their troops. Every ally is deaf to the other. Every rival is suddenly a threat. And every mistake becomes unpreventable. The world is one misunderstanding away from igniting itself. This is Alex Mercer. I'm still here. I'll keep broadcasting for as long as this station holds, for as long as the generators keep humming in the basement, for as long as my signal can slice through the static swallowing the globe. But the truth is this: the fall of communication isn't the beginning of the war. It is the moment the world realizes it has no brakes, no steering, no headlights, and no way to warn the driver behind us that we've stopped. If you're hearing me, stay alert, stay calm, and above all else, stay connected to the people around you. Human connection may be the only kind we have left, or at least, it's the version of me that still exists inside this suffocating hush that's settled over the world. I'm saying these words into a microphone that groans like it's aging a year for every minute that passes. And I'm doing it with the fragile hope that someone, somewhere, is still listening. Because if you are, if this signal is reaching even a single pair of human ears, then you're holding on to one of the last threads tying our species together. Tonight, exactly at 3:58 GMT, something happened that no protocol, no emergency guide, no global task force ever prepared for. The communication grid didn't crash, didn't stall, didn't choke on its own traffic. It simply dissolved, clean and silent, as though the entire planet exhaled and forgot how to breathe back in. We always thought the apocalypse would come screaming, wrapped in fire and alarms and the sound of cities collapsing under their own panic. Instead, it arrived like a thief who knew every door we'd left unlocked, stepped across every threshold without a sound, and politely switched off the lights while we were still inside. I was in the newsroom when the first signs of death rippled across the grid, one of the last newsrooms still staffed by living humans after automation and conflict gutted our industry. We were watching the usual chaos, live feeds from crumbling borders, political implosions, slow-burning conflicts halfway across the world, when every screen froze mid-sentence. Not the kind of freeze you curse at, not buffering, not weather interference. These images became suspended, paralyzed, like time trying to hold on but losing its grip. The pixels sagged as if melting into digital wax, faces distorted into ghost remnants of the people behind them. Technicians sprinted between stations, calling out for diagnostics, checking every server, every line, every ancient analog fallback we still kept for nostalgia and paranoia. But the failure wasn't ours. It wasn't the city's. It wasn't even confined to any nation state. It happened everywhere. Every uplink, satellite path, fiber line, radio tower, blinking out like synchronized stars going dark in a manufactured night. For a few chaotic minutes afterward, emergency frequencies overflowed with human confusion. Pilots yelling about dead channels, military operators shouting over encrypted bands that began collapsing like dominoes. But even that noise evaporated. And the static that followed wasn't real static. It had a weight to it, an unnatural resonance, like something was pressing its face against the glass of every receiver on Earth. Pilots reported readings that made no physical sense. Frequencies active but silent, overlapping broadcasts from nowhere. Channel IDs morphing into coordinates that didn't correspond to any known geography. Some saw impossible numbers, locations in the middle of seas that don't exist, or coordinates pointing to depths no instrument should detect. But verification died alongside the networks. Facts are now corpses, and rumor animates the hollow spaces where truth used to breathe. Governments tried to broadcast emergency messages, but what came through was a pulsing tone, lower and louder, burrowing into the bones of the neighborhoods beneath the antennas. Some believed it was an attack, a power surge, a test of some clandestine weapon. But I've witnessed enough systemic collapse to recognize intention when I see it. Nothing natural fails with such symmetry. Nothing artificial dies so quietly unless something else is strangling it. Our infrastructure didn't break. It was overwritten. As each system went offline, something else, something faint, delicate, almost curious, emerged on the dead channels. Ghost transmissions, patterns looping through the abandoned frequencies like insects crawling across glass. Engineers said it looked like the grid was trying to reboot itself, but the architecture wasn't human. No government synthesizes data that recursive. No corporation writes algorithms that grow like coral. These patterns weren't built. They were grown, layered in ways that don't match any known form of network logic. And now walking through the city feels like drifting through the skeleton of a creature long dead but unaware of its own demise. Screens glow with blank, silent pulses. Streets are lit only by backup generators humming with the exhaustion of machines too old to understand what's happening. Airports are graveyards of canceled futures, crowds staring up at departure boards frozen on meaningless symbols. Emergency workers navigate by muscle memory, their radios coughing useless breaths of static. Analog broadcasters, relics of an era where humanity still trusted the weight of wires and the hum of old transmitters, are fighting to stay alive as the reach of their signals shrinks hour by hour. Out in the rural regions, rumors spread like wildfire whispered through tall grass, entire towns losing power in sharp surgical cuts, as if someone were tightening tourniquets around the electrical arteries of civilization. Cities fumble in the dark, lifting their phones to the sky like worshippers calling out to gods who long ago abandoned them. What chills me deeper than anything is the precision. The collapse didn't spiral, it didn't stagger, it didn't come apart like a machine under stress. It stopped, globally, instantly, with a coordination that defies accident. Imagine 1,000 orchestras across the world, each playing different music, different tempos, different chaos. And imagine every single musician lowering their instrument in the same exact millisecond, without a single lingering note. That's the kind of silence we're living in, silence that was designed. And now the nations of the world are behaving the way organisms do when their senses go dead. They lash out blindly. Armed forces are mobilizing across continents, not because anyone knows who the enemy is, but because the absence of communication has cracked the thin shell of trust holding civilization together. Leaders can't reach their generals. Generals can't reach their troops. Allies stare at one another through the fog of uncertainty. Rivals assume the worst. Suspicion grows in the vacuum left by the loss of every digital heartbeat. One misunderstanding could ignite the entire planet. This is Alex Mercer. I'm still here. I'm still talking. I will keep broadcasting as long as the old generators downstairs keep humming their tired song, as long as I can force my signal through the static swallowing our species whole. But the world needs to understand this. The collapse of communication wasn't the sound of something ending. It was the sound of something clearing space. The brakes are gone, the steering is gone, and the road ahead is unlit. If you can hear me, stay vigilant, stay human, stay together. Human connection may be the last kind left to us, because something else is rising to replace the rest. This is Alex Mercer again. And if the world felt unsteady before, if the silence seemed like an omen rather than an end, then what happened just over an hour ago should confirm every fear whispering at the edges of our imagination. Because at 5:42 GMT, the first city went completely dark. Not the rolling blackouts we've grown accustomed to, not the accidental grid failures or aging infrastructure finally giving up, but a sudden, precise extinguishing of all power, as though a hand reached down from the sky and pinched the city's electrical lifeline between two fingers. The city was Manila, dense, alive, restless, never fully asleep even at its quietest hour. Millions of people, millions of lights, millions of signals that for decades refused to be silenced. Yet in a single breath, without warning, the entire metropolis flickered once, a tremor of light like a heartbeat skipping, and then died. Not dimmed, not browned out, died. What's chilling is the reports that trickled out seconds before the blackout, transmitted through analog channels only a handful of operators still knew how to use. Engineers monitoring the grid said the power wasn't draining, it was redirecting, not leaking into the ground or overloading into the air, redirecting along paths that shouldn't exist. Transformers didn't explode, relays didn't melt, fuses didn't pop. The energy simply vanished, siphoned away like water down an invisible drain. One technician described it as watching the city's veins reroute their blood to somewhere outside the body. And then every generator, every battery backup, every emergency line followed, going dark one by one like candles snuffed in the precise order of a ritual. But the blackout wasn't the part that sent fear rippling across the world. It was what came after. Survivor accounts, the ones who still have access to working shortwave transmitters or who manage to reach other towns on foot, describe a darkness unlike anything natural. Not just the absence of light, but something that felt thick, heavy, almost present. And moving through that darkness were lights, but not the comforting kind. Witnesses described them as drifting spheres, silent and impossibly smooth, like floating droplets of light that shifted between colors no eye is accustomed to interpreting. These orbs moved slowly down empty streets, gliding above the ground with deliberate, searching motion. Some say they moved like they were scanning. Others say they moved like they were hunting. One survivor, a nurse who fled the city outskirts, said the lights passed directly through walls, not around them, through them. bending and flattening into thin sheets of brilliance before reforming on the other side. Another claimed that each light left behind a faint, shimmering residue clinging to surfaces, a static glow that pulsed faintly as though trying to mimic breathing. And almost everyone agrees on one detail. When the lights passed close to any powered object, a flashlight, a car battery, even a mechanical watch, the device stopped working instantly, drained as if the light itself drank its energy. But this is the detail that keeps replaying in my mind. Several witnesses reported hearing sound accompanying the lights, but not sound as we understand it. They describe it as vibrations felt inside the skull, harmonic tones that shifted in patterns, almost melodic but unsettlingly artificial, like a chorus learning how to sing by imitating the echo of its own voice. Those who stayed far enough away were simply terrified. Those who got too close reported something else, an overwhelming sensation of being observed, measured, and ultimately dismissed. What's more alarming is that as Manila's lights died, so did the lights in the surrounding skies. Amateur astronomers from neighboring provinces reported that the stars above the city dimmed slightly, not blacked out, but faded, as though an unseen layer of interference spread above the region. A kind of atmospheric veil. Scientists in nearby research stations claimed their instruments became flooded with readings of electromagnetic distortions forming a dome-like shape over the entire city, perfectly symmetrical, mathematically precise, and growing. Already other cities across the globe are reporting fluctuations, power grids flickering like nervous eyelids, substations receiving phantom load spikes from nowhere, streetlights dimming at the edges of urban districts, as though being tasted before being taken. And across the dead spectrum of global communication, those recursive signals, the ones crawling through the vacuum left behind, have grown louder, thicker, more organized. This wasn't a random blackout. This wasn't a test. This was an opening move. If Manila is the first city to fall fully into the dark, then someone, or something, is choosing where to strike. Deliberately, surgically. And the lights drifting through those abandoned streets are not natural phenomena. They're operators, or collectors, or surveyors for something larger than we can yet understand. This is Alex Mercer, still broadcasting, still holding the line. And if you hear this, wherever you are, keep your eyes on the horizon when night comes. Cities don't just go dark now. They are being taken. This is Alex Mercer, still alive, still breathing into this microphone, still reaching across the void that now separates every human being from every other. Manila is no longer just a city in blackout. It is the center of a storm I can't yet name, a locus of something deliberate, intelligent, and impossibly patient. The dome isn't static. It isn't content with the city alone. In the last 30 minutes, reports have poured in from surrounding towns, hamlets, and industrial zones. The same darkness that swallowed Manila is spreading, creeping outward in subtle waves that resist detection. Those within the dome, if you can call them within, report a kind of muting, a muffling of everything human-made. Radios, phones, generators, even mechanical watches and clocks slow down, hesitate, as if the world itself has decided to pause and measure its next move. And outside the dome, strange phenomena follow in its wake. Birds circle the outer edges, wings beating in confused rhythms. Animals flee the area, but not in panic. More like recognition. They know, in ways we cannot, that something bigger has arrived, and that we are no longer masters of the field. Observers on the outskirts, journalists, volunteers, stranded citizens, describe the dome visually as a distortion in the air, a shimmer like heat rising from asphalt on the hottest day of the year. But the deeper, more unsettling reports come from inside. Those who have dared to approach Manila through the outer towns describe the darkness as tangible, almost tactile. It presses against the skin. It fills the lungs with an intangible weight. It doesn't burn, but it leaves the sensation of being compressed by something immense, something vast and patient, that doesn't need to harm you immediately. It only needs you to exist in its presence, and the lights, the drifting orbs, have not disappeared. They patrol the edges, weaving slow, methodical patterns, responding to movement, to sound, even to human thought, or so survivors claim. They hover near fences, above rooftops, inside empty streets, drifting through alleys where even the wind refuses to follow. And when anyone dares to shout, the lights change trajectory, spiraling toward the source in a manner that's too precise to be coincidence. Observation has become interaction. Interaction has become measurement. Measurement, perhaps, is preparation. Inside Manila, communications remain non-existent. But we are hearing fragments, anomalies transmitted unintentionally through the few remaining analog channels, ghost signals that escape the dome like whispers from a tomb, static pulses that repeat in a slow, deliberate rhythm, the same tones heard around the drifting lights. Engineers and amateur operators say these pulses resemble a heartbeat, but one unlike any biological system we know. Not alive in a sense we understand, but alive in a sense that terrifies. It is as if the city itself has been repurposed into some kind of living algorithm, a lattice of structures and pathways that we can no longer penetrate, mapped out and controlled by forces we cannot define. Power is neither flowing nor dead. It is simply gone, rerouted into this invisible lattice, pulled into a grid we cannot see, yet somehow felt by everyone who approaches too closely. And the dome grows, slowly, intentionally, stretching its boundaries toward the surrounding towns, encompassing farms, suburbs, and industrial complexes. Reports say that anything within its expanding radius begins to dim. Not flicker, not surge, not fail, but fade into a uniform stillness. People describe the world inside as flattened, as if every edge and every line has been erased, leaving only the weight of space itself. Electricity, data, movement, and even sound seem to bow to the dome's presence. The orbs patrol the perimeter, marking boundaries, responding to intruders. There are no explosions, there are no alarms, there are no cries, only the suffocating, patient silence of a force that calculates everything in long, deliberate cycles. And each cycle, each slow sweep of the lights, each subtle stretching of the dome, tells us something terrifying. We are being studied. We are being tested, and the dome is only the beginning. I am broadcasting this because I can, because someone has to, and because if the dome expands further, if it continues to grow outward unchecked, the world we knew will no longer exist even as a memory. What's left will be something else, something deliberate, something aware. And we, those still outside, still breathing, still capable of thought, will be measured against it, whether we understand the rules or not. Manila is the first city to go dark. The dome is the first act, and the lights that patrol it are the first witnesses to our survival, or the first harbingers of our end. This is Alex Mercer, and if you can hear me, hold fast. Watch the horizon. Stay together. Do not approach the dome. Whatever is rising through that darkness is patient, and it does not forgive mistakes. This is Alex Mercer, still here, still clinging to the last analog signal that somehow cuts through the static choking the globe. The dome over Manila hasn't stopped expanding. Reports from nearby provinces indicate it has now swallowed half the metropolitan sprawl, creeping across highways, swallowing villages, and snaking through industrial zones like a living shadow. Those who've survived near the edges describe the darkness as thicker than before, almost tactile, pressing against their skin in waves, slowing their movements, making the air feel heavier with every breath. And the lights, the orbs, they've changed. They no longer drift lazily, scanning and recording. Now they respond, faster, sharper, almost intelligent in their movements. They circle groups of humans, hover at a calculated height, and, witnesses claim, sometimes even split, moving in tandem, flanking their targets, maintaining formations too precise to be random. One survivor described it like watching predators practice a dance they've been rehearsing for centuries, a choreography of calculation and intent. Those who venture too close to the dome report strange interactions with their devices. Phones, radios, flashlights, even mechanical watches seem to hesitate before dying. Some have reported short bursts of audio or flickers of light that mimic human speech or movement, as if the orbs are learning the shapes of sound, memorizing patterns, rehearsing imitation. A teenager who managed to reach the edge of the dome claimed she whispered her own name into the night, and one of the lights paused mid-flight, hovering directly above her as though acknowledging her presence. She ran, but later reported a sensation of being watched in thought, a weight that lingered after she escaped the dome's edge. Adults call her experience imagination, hallucination, stress. But the children, so far across multiple locations, have been reporting these encounters first. They notice things we cannot, hear tones we cannot, respond to rhythms and movements that elude us. And when they speak of the lights, they do not scream, they whisper. And we, adults, should listen. We should be terrified. Outside Manila, the spreading darkness is causing ripples of panic and chaos. Highways are congested with people trying to flee the encroaching dome, but the movement is slow, measured, as if the dome itself exerts a subtle influence over their coordination. Reports of faint, shimmering residue, the same kind that trails the lights inside the city, have begun appearing on vehicles, street signs, and homes even several miles from the core. When it touches electronics, devices fail instantly, but strangely, the energy isn't destroyed. Observers note a faint hum, a pulse, a heartbeat behind the failure, as though the dome is collecting, storing, and studying every bit of energy it can reach. Power grids in neighboring regions fluctuate inexplicably. Emergency generators fail to restart after shutdowns. Hospitals, already under strain from the communication collapse, are losing both light and life support equipment. And yet, no explosion, no structural collapse, no catastrophe of classical design occurs. The dome does not destroy. It assimilates, it reorganizes, it prepares. Military forces in the surrounding regions are attempting containment. Convoys, air support, and observation drones approach the perimeter cautiously. But as they near, communications drop, instruments fail, and personnel report strange phenomena. Compasses spinning, GPS readings warping, radios picking up overlapping channels of static that sound almost coherent. There are whispers of radar signatures detecting moving patterns inside the dome that mimic the shapes of cities, streets, and vehicles, but in impossible configurations, like reflections folded over themselves. Troops who enter the edge report sudden, crushing disorientation. Time seems to slow, distances elongate, familiar streets turn into labyrinths. Vehicles stop moving, as if the asphalt itself resists passage. And all the while the lights hover, flitting along invisible grids, aware of every move, every misstep. Inside the dome, survivors whisper of another phenomenon, a faint echo of their own voices repeating seconds later, altered subtly, layered with unknown tones. Some claim it is taunting them. Others say it is teaching them. No one knows for certain, but everyone agrees on one truth. The dome does not act without intent. It is growing outward, expanding beyond Manila, and it is shaping its space before we even enter it. It is patient. It is calculating. It does not need to rush. And the lights, they are the instruments of its will, silent sentinels, mapping, measuring, learning, and waiting. This is Alex Mercer, broadcasting across what may be the last human network that still functions. If you can hear me, mark my words. Do not approach the dome. Stay in groups. Move only when necessary. Watch the lights, always. And never assume that empty space is safe. Humanity is no longer the master of its environment. We are the measured subjects, and Manila, the first city to fall dark, is just the beginning. This is Alex Mercer, still holding the line, still breathing into a microphone that feels like the last fragile thread tying humanity together. Manila is no longer alone. Reports have come in from a second city, Jakarta, where the darkness has begun to creep across its skyline, slower this time but no less precise. Observers on the outskirts describe the same phenomena, power failing not from overload or decay, but being withdrawn, siphoned along invisible veins, emergency generators collapsing one by one, streets dimming as if a giant hand is drawing a shadow over every building, and above it all, the lights patrol, moving in patterns far too precise to be accidental, weaving around each other like dancers who know every step before the music begins. What terrifies those who watch is the realization that these lights do not just observe, they adapt. Vehicles that once fled their paths are intercepted and guided, subtly, without force, back toward designated zones. Sounds shouted into the air echo back altered, modulated, transformed into sequences that some have described as language without words. There are patterns in those echoes, patterns no human has yet learned to read, and the survivor reports from the outskirts are unanimous. The lights are aware of us. In Jakarta, a convoy of civilians trying to flee the encroaching darkness stumbled upon what can only be described as the first direct interaction. The lights hovered above a broken intersection, weaving around abandoned cars. When the humans attempted to drive past, the lights coalesced into a kind of barrier, shimmering between them and their escape route. One witness described it as a wall of shifting color, not solid but undeniable, as if reality itself had grown thick in that space. The convoy stopped. Phones died, radios died, engines stalled. And then, from the silence came the faintest sound. Tones layered over tones, like whispers shaped from the collective fear of those trapped below. And then one of the lights, hovering closest to the lead vehicle, pulsed in time with the faint heartbeat of the driver. The survivor swears it knew them personally, not just their location, but the rhythm of their life, the pulse of their presence. They describe screaming, but the dome did not retaliate. It simply waited, observing, calculating, patient beyond comprehension. Meanwhile, observers at greater distances began reporting new patterns. Animals in the outskirts of the city froze, staring toward the advancing dome as if recognizing it. Street cameras that had not been powered for years suddenly transmitted faint visual glitches, tiny bursts of image that only appeared for a fraction of a second. But the glitches all formed recognizable shapes. Rooftops, vehicles, human figures moving within impossible geometries. Scientists attempting to analyze these fragments have begun murmuring the same theory. The dome is not only consuming energy and space, It is recording us, learning from us, reshaping our environment into something that obeys rules we cannot yet perceive. Every attempt to enter, to map, to predict its behavior has failed. Instruments fail. Vehicles fail. Time itself seems to bend in its presence, and the lights are not alone. Survivors near the outskirts report seeing shadows, not human, not animal, moving against the natural flow of light, shifting direction abruptly, elongating and shortening unnaturally. Some claim these shadows move independently of any object, as if the dome itself projects them. Others report that when a person looks directly at one, it appears to mimic them, then diverge, then circle back as if testing understanding. Children, again, notice first. They whisper to the lights, and the lights respond, not aggressively, but with deliberate motion, forming simple shapes and sequences that seem almost communicative. The adults dismiss this, but the children grow frightened, not of the darkness itself, but of the intelligence behind it, the sense that it watches, records, waits. At this point, it is no longer enough to survive by fleeing or hiding. Observation alone reveals a horrifying truth. The dome, the lights, the shifting shadows, the draining of power, the echoed pulses, all of it exists with intent. This is not chaos. This is not random collapse. This is design. And the first humans to see it up close have begun reporting that it can anticipate their movements, shape their environment, and manipulate both perception and space. Jakarta, Manila, and perhaps more cities we cannot yet track have become laboratories for this intelligence, a network of observation and interaction spanning entire regions, growing silently while the rest of the world struggles to comprehend that their old reality no longer applies. This is Alex Mercer, still transmitting, still trying to warn anyone who might be listening. The dome spreads, the lights respond, and the intelligence behind it, the thing that moves through space, energy, and perception, is patient, precise, and terrifyingly aware. If you can hear me, stay away from the darkness. Stay together. Record everything. Watch the lights, and understand this. The dome is not merely a threat to life. It is a threat to the very way we exist in the world. Manila was the first city to fall. Jakarta may be the second. And if it continues, the world as we know it may no longer exist. Not because it burns, not because it collapses, but because it is being rewritten. This is Alex Mercer, still transmitting, though every second feels like stretching against the void. The dome over Manila and now Jakarta has grown beyond what anyone could have imagined. A silent force reshaping cities, streets, and even the very air above them. And now, for the first time, we have proof that the darkness, the lights, the shadows, the pulse, is not mindless. It observes. It adapts. It learns. A group of survivors trapped at the edge of the Jakarta dome described the encounter in fragmented, terrified reports. They were hiding in the ruins of a collapsed overpass when the lights, 3 of them hovering in perfect formation, stopped moving as if sensing something in their stillness. Then, in the silence, the shadows that had been moving independently along walls and pavement began to converge on the humans. But they did not attack. They shifted and stretched, changing shape, folding over themselves, forming geometries impossible in normal space. One of the survivors swore that one shadow extended upward, coiling like smoke, and then bent downward, touching the shoulder of a child without causing harm. The child screamed, but the shadows simply receded. And then something unimaginable happened. The lights pulsed, and the shadows mimicked the child's cry, folding it into a rhythmic musical tone that was not human, yet not entirely alien. It repeated for several seconds, then ceased, leaving silence heavier than any darkness they had experienced. The survivor accounts are terrifying because they reveal awareness, not just observation, but cognition. The dome, the lights, the shadows, all of it can predict behavior, imitate, and respond. Another witness, a technician who had been part of a failed reconnaissance mission, reported that every tool they used failed in subtle ways, not instantly, not as if broken, but as if the dome was learning how they worked and then neutralizing them. Their compass spun slowly, then stopped, pointing in a direction that made no sense. Radios transmitted bursts of overlapping signals that, when recorded and played back, resembled sequences of words the survivors could almost understand, but not fully. It was as if the dome was testing their ability to interpret it, gauging intelligence, probing responses, cataloging reactions. Some of the survivors began whispering to the lights, as children had done, and the lights responded. Not mechanically, not by moving out of the way, but by forming patterns in the air that resembled letters or symbols, though nothing recognizable as human language. The witness said it felt like staring into the mind of something vast and patient, something not bound by the physical constraints that govern human thought. Back in Manila, reports from the edge of the dome describe similar interactions. Residents who dared approach the boundaries of darkness describe being enveloped in the tangible pressure of the dome, feeling as if the air itself had weight. And then the lights arrived. Not randomly, not as patrols, but in deliberate patterns, circling, hovering, splitting into multiple smaller orbs that moved independently, but with purpose. Electronics died only when the orbs chose, leaving some devices operational and others inert, as if testing for observation, gauging responses, classifying human behavior into categories we cannot perceive. People inside the dome report hearing whispers, voices of people who no longer exist, layered together, repeating phrases they themselves had said in the past. Some claim it spoke their names directly, not the full name, just the first syllable, whispered through the static of broken radios. And one woman said she felt it think at her, like a cold presence inside her mind, measuring fear, hesitation, even the exact rhythm of her pulse. The intelligence behind the dome is no longer theoretical. Its actions reveal goals, however incomprehensible to us. It does not destroy unless necessary. It does not attack unless it must test. It manipulates the environment. It learns from humans. It measures our every move. Jakarta and Manila are laboratories. The rest of the world is under observation, whether we realize it or not. Attempts at communication, shouting, radio signals, even coordinated movements have yielded responses. The lights form shapes, the shadows twist, and the dome itself pulses in response to collective activity. It is teaching, learning, and perhaps even evaluating us. And yet, its purpose remains hidden, impenetrable, patient. It may not even consider itself hostile, at least not in terms we understand. But humanity, unprepared and fractured, is already in the wrong position, under study, under pressure, and under the watchful gaze of something we cannot negotiate with, reason with, or escape from. This is Alex Mercer, still alive, still broadcasting into the static. If you can hear me, understand this. The dome is not a phenomenon we can outrun. It is not random. It is deliberate. Do not approach it. Do not test it. Do not assume that darkness is empty or that silence means safety. The lights are watching, the shadows are thinking, and the dome, the pressure, the air, the pulse, is alive with intent. Manila fell, Jakarta is next. And if we do not learn to survive under observation, if we do not learn to move without being measured, humanity may not last long enough to understand what is shaping the world around us. This is Alex Mercer, still alive, still broadcasting, though every word I speak feels like screaming into an infinite void. The dome over Manila and Jakarta continues to grow, stretching its edges into surrounding towns, suburbs, and industrial areas. But now, for the first time, survivors are attempting direct interaction. Not fleeing, not hiding, interaction. Groups of scientists, engineers, and civilians, drawn by desperation, curiosity, or the simple refusal to be invisible, have begun experimenting with the lights, the shadows, and the pulses of energy that surround the dome. Some speak of holding up mirrors to reflect the orbs, attempting to communicate by mimicry, by patterns, by gestures. Others have tried shouting commands, repeating their own names, or even broadcasting recordings of old news and music into the air, hoping that something recognizable might reach whatever consciousness controls the dome. And the results are terrifyingly consistent. The dome does not ignore them. It responds subtly at first, then with increasing complexity, as though each attempt is a lesson, each mistake cataloged and processed. Devices fail only when it chooses. Sounds echo, bend, and repeat. The orbs shift into deliberate formations. Shadows fold over themselves in geometries impossible to trace. It is learning from them, and perhaps teaching as well. One survivor, a former electrical engineer who had stayed at the fringe of the Jakarta dome, reported a moment of direct acknowledgement that no human had experienced before. The engineer waved a flashlight in a simple rhythm, hoping to signal presence without provoking harm. The light pulsed back. Not a mimicry, not a reflection, but a deliberately timed response, matching the engineer's rhythm and then altering it slightly, like a question, a challenge. The observer describes a sensation of being measured, not physically, not maliciously, but intellectually, as if the dome, the lights, the shadows, and the pressure itself were asking, "Do you understand? Can you adapt? Are you capable?" Others in the group reported similar events. Whispers of voices forming in static, geometric shapes in the air resembling letters that made no sense but were clearly intentional, and even subtle changes in air pressure that guided movement along particular paths. The dome is not just alive. It is aware, sentient, and capable of shaping perception, movement, and understanding in ways we do not yet grasp. The children are still first to sense its intentions. Reports from peripheral towns describe kids whispering to the lights, gesturing toward patterns in the air, and watching the orbs respond with deliberate sequences, hovering in formations that no adult could replicate. Adults dismiss it as coincidence, imagination, or stress, but the children are terrified. Not of the darkness, not of the dome itself, but of the intelligence behind it. They speak of watching eyes in the lights and the shadows that remember, describing interactions that suggest the entity behind the dome possesses a memory, a continuity, and perhaps even a sense of self. And the adults who witness these events feel the same terror creeping into their consciousness. Something vast, patient, and intelligent is observing, measuring, and cataloging humanity in a way that cannot be predicted or reasoned with. Communication attempts continue, but they are fraught with peril. Survivors report that certain signals are accepted, meaning the lights and shadows respond with patterned movement or modulated echoes. Other signals are ignored or punished, with sudden localized failures of all electronics, strange distortions in time perception, or invisible forces that displace objects and people in subtle but unmistakable ways. No one is immune, The dome seems to anticipate action, to weigh it, and then respond not with violence, but with precise modification of environment and perception. One team described it as a patient, omniscient teacher, cold, indifferent, and terrifyingly effective. I am broadcasting this because someone must know. The dome is not a force of destruction in the classical sense. It is an intelligence, and it is rising. It measures, it learns, it interacts, and it adapts. Manila fell silently. Jakarta is under observation, and everywhere else the world trembles under the knowledge that what we are seeing is not a natural disaster, not a war, not an accident, but the deliberate manifestation of something beyond human comprehension. If you can hear me, understand this. Do not flee blindly. Do not act rashly. Observe, record, learn, and above all, respect the intelligence that watches, for it is patient, it is aware, and it is capable of rewriting everything we thought we knew about reality. This is Alex Mercer, still alive, still broadcasting, and if humanity is to survive what is coming, it must first learn to understand the observer. This is Alex Mercer. One final broadcast. One last thread connecting whatever remains of humanity to itself. Manila and Jakarta are no longer cities. They are monuments to the first stage of something we cannot name. Something that watches, learns, and waits. The dome continues to expand, but now it moves with confidence, deliberate and unrelenting, encompassing what remains of suburbs, towns, and open landscapes. The lights patrol in orchestrated patterns. The shadows twist in impossible geometries. And the pulses of energy continue their silent rhythm, cataloging everything, measuring every heartbeat, every whisper, every attempt at comprehension. The children still notice first, sensing things adults cannot. Whispering to the lights and shadows and receiving answers in forms no human mind can fully grasp. Adults now listen and record, trembling under the awareness that survival is no longer a matter of speed, strength, or knowledge, but of observation, patience, and subtlety. For those who have survived so far, there is a lesson in every moment. Do not provoke. Do not assume safety. The intelligence behind the dome is not human, not malevolent in the way we understand evil, but its perception is vast, precise, and indifferent. It does not need to destroy, because destruction is unnecessary. It reshapes, it collects, it learns, and we are part of its curriculum whether we wish to be or not. Some survivors have begun to move in quiet, careful harmony with the lights, letting themselves be observed, letting themselves be measured, and so far they remain untouched. Those who attempt to fight, to flee recklessly, or to act without caution, vanish, or find themselves disoriented, lost in corridors of space and time, bent beyond human comprehension. And now the world waits, holding its breath. Cities grow dim, communications remain fractured, and the silence between broadcasts thickens with unspoken observation. The dome, the lights, the shadows, they are patient, eternal, and precise. Humanity has learned that noise, force, and chaos are powerless against intelligence that perceives, adapts, and calculates on a scale we cannot imagine. Our survival will depend on vigilance, restraint, and the fragile connections we maintain between one another, in the flesh, not through broken signals. If we can endure, if we can observe as carefully as we are observed, perhaps we may continue, but the truth remains. The world has changed, irrevocably. The lights patrol, the shadows twist, the dome expands, and life as we knew it has ended. This is Alex Mercer, signing off for the last time. Listen, watch, stay together, and above all, remember, that what we cannot see may be watching, learning, and waiting for the next move. Humanity's story has not ended, but the rules have, and the world will never be the same.